This marriage is a cage, but I have no choice. The words escaped my lips like a dying breath. I stood before the cracked mirror in my childhood bedroom, watching a stranger in white lace stare back at me. The wedding dress hung loose around my shoulders. It had belonged to my grandmother, a woman who had loved freely and chosen her own path. How different our stories would be. 3 weeks of barely eating will do that to a girl. Elena, are you ready? Mama's voice trembled through the door like autumn leaves in winter wind. Almost, I lied, my fingers shaking as I adjusted the lace collar. Outside my window, Millbrook's Main Street buzzed with Saturday morning life. Children chased wooden hoops down dusty roads, their laughter echoing off weathered storefronts. Shopkeepers swept their stoops with methodical precision. Life continued its normal rhythm as if this weren't the day my soul would be sold to save my family's reputation. The clock on my dresser ticked like a death sentence. 10:35. 25 minutes until I became Mrs. Harold Blackwood. 25 minutes until I stopped being Helena Morrison and became someone's property. But what I didn't know was that everything would change before those church bells stopped ringing. My fingers traced the silver locket at my throat, a gift from my late grandmother. Inside was a pressed wildflower from the meadow behind our house, where I used to run barefoot through tall grass, dreaming of adventure and true love. That innocent girl was about to disappear forever, replaced by a dutiful wife who would smile on command and speak only when spoken to. Helena Morrison, you get down here this instant. Papa's voice cracked like thunder, sharp with the desperation he was trying to hide. I knew that tone intimately. It was the same voice he'd used when the bank notice arrived, when creditors came calling, when Harold Blackwood had appeared at our dinner table with his cold ultimatum 3 months ago. Marry me or watch your family lose everything. Coming, Papa. I called back, though my feet felt rooted to the wooden floorboards. I took one last look in the mirror. Hollow eyes stared back from a face that had grown gaunt with worry. Pale skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. I looked like a woman walking to her own funeral, dressed in white for her own burial. And maybe that's exactly what this was. The door creaked as I opened it, the sound echoing through our modest home like a gunshot. Mama waited at the bottom of the stairs, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, her face streaked with tears she was pretending weren't there. You look beautiful, dear, she whispered, but her voice broke on the last word like glass hitting stone. Do I have to do this? I asked, though we both knew the answer. Papa appeared behind her, his jaw set in that stubborn line I knew so well. Once that determination had built our family's standing in this town, now it was being used to tear my heart in two. We've been through this, Helena. Harold is a good man, a successful man. You'll want for nothing. But I don't love him, Papa. I don't even like him. Love? Papa's laugh was bitter as burnt coffee. Love doesn't pay debts, girl. Love doesn't keep roofs over heads or food on tables. Love is a luxury we can no longer afford. Yet what I didn't understand was that sometimes love finds a way anyway, even in the darkest circumstances. The carriage waited outside like a black omen, its polished surface reflecting the morning sun like dark water. Harold Blackwood sat inside, checking his gold pocket watch with the mechanical precision of a man who valued punctuality above all else. His gray eyes flicked over me as I approached, appraising me like livestock being brought to market. Punctual. Good, he said as I climbed in beside him, his voice carrying no warmth, no affection for his bride-to-be. No compliment on my dress, no kind word about this being our wedding day. Just cold satisfaction that his property was arriving on schedule. You understand your duties as my wife? He continued, adjusting his black coat. Yes, sir. Good. I expect a well-run household. No frivolity, no unnecessary expenses, and certainly no nonsense about romantic notions. The carriage lurched forward with a jolt that seemed to shake my very soul. Through the window, familiar sights rolled past like scenes from someone else's life. Mrs. Hartwell tending her prize roses, their red blooms bright as drops of blood. The Miller boys playing marbles in the dusty street, their voices high and carefree. And then Jacob Hayes working at his forge, his strong arms moving the hammer in steady rhythm. Jacob. Our eyes met through the carriage window for one heart-stopping moment. He straightened from his anvil, hammer frozen mid-swing, and something flickered across his weathered face. Concern, recognition, and something deeper that made my heart skip like a stone across water. Who is that man staring at you? Harold's voice cut through my thoughts like a blade. Just the blacksmith, I managed. You know him? Everyone knows everyone in Millbrook, Mr. Blackwood. But that wasn't entirely true. I knew Jacob Hayes in the way every unmarried woman in town knew him. Quiet and hard-working, kind to children and gentle with animals. The sort of man who tipped his hat to ladies and never spoke ill of anyone, even those who deserved it. The sort of man who had kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. The sort of man I could have loved, if I'd been allowed to choose my own path. And that was when everything started to change. The church bells began their solemn tolling, each chime hammering another nail into the coffin of my dreams. But something else rang out too. The thunder of hoofbeats, fast and urgent like someone racing against time itself. A lone rider was racing toward the church, dust clouds rising in his wake. "What's that commotion?" Harold muttered, irritation creeping into his voice. Through the carriage window I watched the horseman disappear around the corner, riding like the devil himself was giving chase, or like an angel was racing to prevent a tragedy from unfolding. But what I didn't know was that the rider carried news that would shatter everything we thought we knew. The carriage pulled up to the church steps with a final decisive jolt. The white stone building gleamed in the morning sun, its doors standing open like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. The bell tower loomed overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me with ghostly fingers. "Come along," Harold said, climbing down first before turning to help me with hands that felt cold as winter morning. "Time to make this official and binding." I managed a weak smile that felt more like a grimace. The whole town was watching from the church steps, their faces a mixture of pity and curiosity. They all knew this marriage was a business transaction rather than a love match, but politeness demanded they pretend otherwise. The church was packed to capacity, every pew filled with familiar faces from my childhood. Some looked genuinely sad for my fate. Others whispered behind gloved hands, no doubt speculating about the details of Papa's financial ruin. All of them knew they were witnessing the sacrifice of a young woman's happiness for the sake of family honor. Pastor Williams waited at the altar, his usually kind eyes meeting mine with sympathy he couldn't voice aloud. He had baptized me as a baby, confirmed me as a girl, and now he would bind me to a man old enough to be my father. "Are you ready, my child?" he asked softly, his voice heavy with unspoken regret. No, I would never be ready to sacrifice my heart on the altar of Papa's debts. But I nodded anyway because that was what dutiful daughters did. Harold took his place beside me, his grip on my arm firm and possessive, like he was already claiming ownership of his newest acquisition. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, his voice echoing off the stone walls, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Harold Blackwood and Helena Morrison in holy matrimony." The words washed over me like cold water. I felt disconnected from my own body, like I was watching someone else's tragic story unfold. This couldn't be my life. This couldn't be how my story ended. Until the church doors burst open with a crash that shook the entire building. And that was when everything changed forever. Every head in the church turned toward the thunderous crash. The heavy oak doors swung wide, letting in a shaft of brilliant sunlight that cut through the dusty air like a sword. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, breathing hard and covered in road dust. It was Jacob Hayes. "Stop!" His voice rang out across the silent congregation like a bell. "This wedding cannot proceed." Pastor Williams dropped his prayer book. The leather binding hit the floor with a wet slap that echoed through the stunned silence. Harold's grip on my arm tightened until I could feel his fingers digging into my flesh through the delicate lace sleeves. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" Harold's voice was ice-cold fury barely held in check. Jacob stepped into the church, his boots echoing on the stone floor. His usually neat brown hair was disheveled from hard riding, and his simple work clothes were stained with sweat and dust. But his dark eyes burned with a determination I had never seen before. "Harold Blackwood," Jacob called out, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the church. "You are not free to marry. You already have a wife." The congregation erupted in gasps and whispers. Someone in the back pews let out a strangled cry. I felt the blood drain from my face as the words hit me like a physical blow. "That's impossible," Harold snarled, but something flickered across his face. But what I didn't know was that Jacob had spent 3 days riding to the next county to uncover the truth. "Margaret Blackwood," Jacob continued, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket, "married to you in Riverside County 5 years ago. very much alive and wondering why her husband abandoned her and their 2 children. The paper crackled as he unfolded it. Even from a distance, I could see the official seal of the county clerk. "You have children," I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. Harold's face had gone pale as winter snow. That marriage was annulled. "No," Jacob said firmly. "I have the records right here. Certificate of marriage, birth certificates for little Samuel and Mary Blackwood, and a statement from your wife wondering why you disappeared in the middle of the night 3 years ago." The church had fallen so silent you could hear a pin drop. Every eye was fixed on Harold, waiting for his response. But the man who had seemed so confident and controlling just moments before now looked like a cornered animal. "This is ridiculous," Harold blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're obviously mistaken, blacksmith." "Am I?" Jacob took another step forward. "Then you won't mind if we send a telegram to Riverside County and have them confirm these documents?" And that was when Harold's mask finally slipped completely. "You meddling fool." Harold released my arm so suddenly I stumbled backward. "You have no idea what you've done. The Morrison family owes me $5,000. If this marriage doesn't proceed, they'll lose everything." "Harold!" Papa's voice cracked like a whip from the front pew. But Jacob's attention was fixed entirely on me now. Those dark eyes held mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "Elena," he said softly, "you don't have to do this. No debt is worth sacrificing your entire life." "But my family," I started. "We'll find another way," Jacob interrupted. "There's always another way." Harold let out a bitter laugh. "Another way? Morrison owes half the county. His bank is failing. His reputation is ruined. This girl is the only asset he has left to trade." The cruel words hit me like slaps. Asset, trade, as if I were nothing more than a piece of property to be bartered away. But what Harold didn't know was that Jacob Hayes had been in love with me for 2 years. "She's not property," Jacob said, his voice deadly quiet. "She's a human being with her own heart and mind and dreams, and no man has the right to buy and sell her like cattle." He turned to address the entire congregation, his voice rising with passion. "How many of you have watched Helena Morrison grow up in this town? How many of you remember her bringing soup to sick neighbors, helping teach Sunday school, reading to the elderly folks who can't see well anymore?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. I saw Mrs. Hartwell dabbing at her eyes with her handkerchief. "And now you're all willing to stand by and watch her be handed over to a man who lies about having a wife and children? A man who sees her as nothing more than a solution to a debt." Pastor Williams cleared his throat. "Mr. Hayes raises valid concerns. If Mr. Blackwood is indeed already married, those documents are forgeries," Harold snapped. "Then you won't object to verification," Jacob replied smoothly. The tension in the church was thick enough to cut with a knife. I could feel the weight of every gaze, hear the rustle of fabric as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Yet what I didn't understand was that my father had known the truth all along. "Papa?" I turned to look at the man who had raised me, searching his face for answers. "Did you know about this?" Papa's face had aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. His shoulders sagged under an invisible weight. "I had suspicions," he admitted quietly. "But I needed the money, Helena. I needed it so desperately." The confession hit me like a physical blow. "You were willing to marry me to a bigamist just to save yourself? To save our family?" Papa stood up, his face flushed with desperation. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The threats. If I don't pay these debts, then you should have come to the community for help," Mrs. Hartwell called out from her pew. "Instead of sacrificing your daughter's happiness." Easy words from someone who's never faced financial ruin. Papa shot back, but Jacob stepped between us before the argument could escalate further. "Helena," he said, extending his hand toward me, "you have a choice to make, right here, right now. You can go through with this marriage to a man who's lied to you from the beginning, or you can walk away and trust that there's a better path waiting." I stared at his outstretched hand, calloused from honest work, strong enough to protect, gentle enough to comfort, everything Harold's hands were not. "If I don't marry him, my family loses everything," I said. "Maybe, or maybe they'll find the courage to face their problems honestly instead of hiding behind their daughter's sacrifice." Harold made a sound of disgust. "How touching. The blacksmith thinks he can solve everything with pretty words and noble gestures, but words don't pay creditors, boy. They don't keep roofs over heads or food on tables." No, Jacob agreed, but they also don't condemn innocent women to loveless marriages with lying bigamists. And that was when I realized I had to choose between my family's financial security and my own soul. The silence stretched on for what felt like eternity. Every person in that church was holding their breath, waiting to see what I would do. Would I be the dutiful daughter who sacrificed everything for family honor, or would I find the courage to choose my own path? I looked at Harold's face, twisted with anger and frustration, then at Papa, slumped in defeat, then at Jacob, whose dark eyes held nothing but hope and understanding. I started, then stopped. My voice felt trapped in my throat. Choose, Helena, Jacob said softly. Not for your father, not for Harold, not for anyone else in this church. Choose for yourself. What does your heart want? My heart wanted Jacob Hayes. It had wanted him for longer than I dared to admit even to myself. But wanting something and being free to have it were two very different things. And that was when everything changed again. The church doors opened once more, and this time a woman entered. She was small and delicate, with brown hair and tired eyes. Two children clung to her skirts, a boy and a girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Harold? The woman called out in a voice that shook with exhaustion and desperate hope. Harold, is that really you? Every eye in the church turned to stare at Harold Blackwood, whose face had gone white as fresh snow, because his first wife had just walked into our wedding. The woman's voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade. Every head turned to stare at the small figure in the doorway, her worn dress speaking of hard times. The little boy beside her had Harold's gray eyes. The girl was younger, maybe 4, with curls that caught the sunlight. Margaret, Harold whispered, and the single word contained a lifetime of guilt. You know my name, she said, stepping into the church. I wasn't sure you'd remember, considering you disappeared 3 years ago. The congregation sat frozen, witnessing something too private for public viewing, yet none of us could look away. Mama, is that Papa? The little boy asked. Margaret's composure cracked slightly. Yes, Samuel, that's your father. But what none of us knew was that Margaret had sold everything she owned to travel here. Jacob moved protectively closer to me. My entire world had been turned upside down in 10 minutes, and he was the only solid thing in a sea of chaos. How did you find me? Harold asked. I hired a detective, Margaret replied. It took me 2 years to save enough money, but I never stopped looking. These children deserve to know their father. Harold's face cycled through shock, fear, anger. Margaret, I can explain. Can you explain why you took our savings and disappeared? Why you left me to raise our children alone? I felt sick, realizing how close I had come to binding myself to this man. You don't understand the pressures I was under, Harold began. Pressures? Margaret's voice rose. I worked 16-hour days in a laundry just to keep us fed. Little Mary cried herself to sleep asking when Papa was coming home. Pastor William stepped forward. Mr. Blackwood, if what this woman says is true, it's all true, Jacob said, producing more papers. Marriage certificate, birth records, and statements from neighbors who remember when Harold Blackwood left in the dead of night. And that was when I realized how completely I had been deceived. Helena, Margaret said, turning to me. Her eyes were kind but tired. I assume you're the woman he was planning to marry? I nodded. I'm sorry, I know this must be devastating, but I couldn't let him do to another family what he did to mine. Thank you for saving me from the worst mistake of my life, I managed to say. Harold laughed harshly. Saved you? Without this marriage, your father's debts will destroy him. You'll lose everything. But what Harold didn't understand was that some things were more important than money. I'd rather be poor and honest than rich and married to a liar, I said, surprised by my own strength. Well said, child, Pastor Williams murmured. Harold's mask was crumbling. You foolish girl. You think love will keep you warm at night? Put food on your table? At least I'll sleep with a clear conscience. Jacob moved closer. Helena's right. There are more important things than financial security. Easy words from a blacksmith, Harold sneered. I've faced hardship, Jacob said quietly. Lost my parents at 14. Built my business from nothing. I know what struggle means, but struggling with honor is better than succeeding through lies. Margaret spoke again. Harold, you have children who need their father. When are you going to start acting like the man they deserve? Yet what none of us expected was Harold's next move. Instead of showing remorse, Harold's face twisted with rage. This is all your fault. he snarled at Jacob, lunging forward. Jacob sidestepped the clumsy attack and caught Harold's wrist. That's enough. You've caused enough damage. Let go of me. Walk out quietly, without causing more scenes in front of your children. Little Samuel was crying now. The sight drained the fight out of Harold. This isn't over, Harold muttered. Yes, it is, Margaret said with quiet finality. We're going home, Harold. All of us. You're going to face your responsibilities. And that was when I felt truly free for the first time in months. The weight pressing down on my chest was finally lifting. I could breathe again, think clearly. Imagine a future that didn't involve pretending to love a man who saw me as property. What happens now? I asked Jacob softly. Now you choose your own path, just your own heart and dreams. I looked around the church at familiar faces. For the first time in my life, their opinions didn't matter. Papa, I said, turning to face him. I'm sorry about your debts, but I can't fix them by sacrificing my life to a dishonest man. Papa's face crumpled. Helena, please. You've been so focused on saving face that you forgot about saving your daughter's soul. But what I didn't expect was Jacob's next words. Mr. Morrison, Jacob addressed my father. I may not have Harold's wealth, but I have a successful business and savings. If Helena will have me, I'd like to help your family through this difficult time. Papa's eyes widened with hope mixed with disbelief. You'd do that? I'd do it for Helena, for the chance to build an honest life with her if she's willing. All eyes turned to me. This time I wasn't choosing between bad options. This time I was choosing between fear and hope. Margaret paused as she passed my pew. Follow your heart, child. Life's too short to settle for anything less than real love. Then she was gone, herding Harold and their children toward the door. Suddenly the church felt different, lighter, full of possibility instead of dread. Jacob extended his hand toward me once again. This time nothing stood between us except my own fears. Helena Morrison, he said, his voice warm as summer sunshine. Will you give me the honor of courting you properly? No pressure, no debts, no expectations except the hope that we might build something beautiful together. I looked at his outstretched hand, strong and honest and offering everything I had ever dreamed of. For the first time in my life, the choice was entirely mine. And that was when I realized that sometimes the best decisions feel like jumping off a cliff and trusting you'll learn to fly. I reached for Jacob's hand, my fingers trembling as they touched his warm palm. The moment our skin connected, I felt something electric pass between us. Yes, I whispered. Yes, I'll let you court me. The church erupted in murmurs of approval. Mrs. Hartwell dabbed at her eyes. Even Pastor Williams was smiling. But Papa's face had gone ashen. Helena, wait. You don't understand what you're doing. I'm choosing my own future. Your future? Papa stood up, his voice rising. What about our family's future? The creditors will take everything by week's end. Jacob squeezed my hand. Mr. Morrison, as I said, I'm willing to help. Help? Papa's laugh was bitter. You think a blacksmith's wages can cover $5,000? But what none of us knew was that Papa had been lying about more than just the debt amount. 5,000? Jacob's eyebrows shot up. Harold told me it was 3,000. Papa's face flushed red. Well, there are additional expenses. Papa, I said slowly. How much do we really owe? The silence stretched like a taut rope. 8,000, he whispered. Maybe 9. The number hit me like a physical blow. Jacob's jaw tightened. That's not debt from bad investments. That's gambling debt. And that was when the terrible truth finally came out. You've been gambling again, haven't you, Papa? Papa's silence was answer enough. The poker games at Hannigan's saloon, Mrs. Hartwell said quietly. I thought I could win it back, Papa said desperately. Just one good hand. Instead you made it 10 times worse, I said. Jacob's hand tightened around mine. Selena, this changes nothing between us, but your father needs to face consequences. Face them? Papa's voice cracked. You think I can face Big Tom Cassidy when he comes calling? The name sent a chill through the church. Everyone knew about Big Tom Cassidy. You borrowed from Cassidy? Jacob's voice was deadly quiet. I had no choice. Harold's money was the only way to pay him back before he... But what Papa didn't know was that Big Tom's men were already on their way. The sound of hoofbeats thundered outside. Not Sunday riders, but the urgent gallop of men with violence on their minds. Oh no, Papa whispered. The church doors slammed open. 3 men entered, their long coats dusty from hard riding. Their hands rested casually on the guns at their hips. The man in front was tall and lean, with dead eyes and a scar running from ear to jaw. Big Tom Cassidy. "Well, well," he said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "Looks like we missed the wedding." The congregation sat frozen in terror. "Tom," Papa said, his voice barely a whisper. "I can explain." "No need for explanations, Morrison. Seems your daughter's got more sense than you do." Cassidy's cold gaze swept over the church. When his eyes found mine, I felt ice water pour down my spine. Jacob stepped in front of me, his body tense as a coiled spring. "This is a house of God, Cassidy. My business is with Morrison, and Morrison owes me $9,000. And that was when Jacob made the bravest and most foolish decision of his life. "I'll pay it," he said quietly. Cassidy raised an eyebrow. "You'll pay Morrison's debt? All 9,000? If you'll give me time to liquidate my assets." "Yes." "What makes you think Morrison's debt is worth bankrupting yourself?" Jacob's answer was simple. "Because Helena is worth everything." The words hit me like lightning. No one had ever said I was worth anything, let alone everything. But what Jacob didn't understand was that Cassidy wasn't interested in reasonable solutions. "Touching," Cassidy said with a cold smile. "But it's too late for payment plans. Time's up." He signaled to his men, who began moving toward Papa. "Wait." I stepped forward. "What if there was another way?" "I'm listening." "My father's business. The bank building. Our house. All of it must be worth something." "Maybe 4,000. Cassidy shrugged. "Leaves me 5,000 short." My mind raced, desperate to find a solution. "Then take me," I said. The words fell into the church like stones into water. "Helena!" Jacob grabbed my arm. "No, absolutely not." "Take you how?" Cassidy asked. "As payment. My father's debt in exchange for my service. I can keep books, cook, clean." "Interesting. A young, pretty woman is worth quite a lot." The implication made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to stand straight. "1 year of service," I said, "in exchange for wiping out Papa's entire debt." Jacob's grip tightened. "I won't let you do this." And that was when everything exploded into chaos. "You won't let her?" Cassidy laughed. "Boy, you're not in a position to let anything." He nodded to his men, and guns were drawn and pointed at Jacob's chest. "Here's what's going to happen," Cassidy continued. "Morrison's coming with us, right now, and if he can't produce $9,000 by sunset tomorrow, his gambling days are over." "No!" I lunged forward, but one of Cassidy's men caught my wrist. Jacob moved like lightning, his blacksmith strength catching everyone off guard. He knocked the gun aside and landed a solid punch before anyone could react. But there were 3 of them, and only one of him. The church erupted in screams as the fight began. And that was when I realized that sometimes love means making impossible choices. The church exploded into chaos. Jacob's fist connected with the gunman's jaw, sending him stumbling backward. Women screamed. Men shouted. Children cried. But through the noise I heard something that made my heart stop. The thunder of more hoofbeats. Dozens of them. "What the hell?" Cassidy spun toward the doors just as they burst open again. Sheriff McKenna strode in, followed by 6 deputies with rifles raised. Behind them came half the men from town, armed with hunting rifles in grim determination. "Drop your weapons!" McKenna's voice boomed through the church. "Now!" Cassidy's men hesitated, their guns wavering between Jacob and the wall of armed townspeople suddenly facing them. "You're outnumbered, Tom," the sheriff said calmly. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." But what none of us knew was that Mrs. Hartwell had slipped out during Harold's confrontation and summoned help. "Smart woman," McKenna said later. "She knew trouble was coming and got word to me before Cassidy's men even reached the church." Cassidy's cold eyes swept the room, calculating odds. 3 men against 20 wasn't a fight even he was willing to take. "This isn't over, Morrison," he snarled, but slowly raised his hands. His men followed suit, their weapons clattering to the stone floor. "Actually, it is over," a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see a well-dressed stranger enter the church. He carried a leather satchel and had the look of a man accustomed to handling money. "Who are you?" Cassidy demanded. "Benjamin Clark, attorney from the territorial capital. I represent the estate of Jeremiah Morrison." Papa's face went white. Uncle Jeremiah? But he died 5 years ago. Yes, and his will has finally cleared probate. Mr. Morrison, you've inherited your uncle's silver mine in Colorado Territory. Current estimated value $15,000. The church fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. 15,000? Papa whispered. The paperwork is all here, Clark continued, patting his satchel. I've been trying to reach you for months, but my letters apparently never arrived. And that was when I realized that Papa's crisis had been solved by Providence itself. Cassidy's face twisted with rage. This is convenient timing. Not convenient, Clark said mildly. Just the law. Mr. Morrison can now pay his debts in full, with plenty left over. Sheriff McKenna stepped forward. Tom Cassidy, you're under arrest for threatening behavior and carrying weapons in a house of worship. On what authority? Territorial jurisdiction. We've been wanting to have a chat with you about some missing persons in 3 counties. As the deputies led Cassidy and his men away in chains, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The nightmare was over. Papa's debts would be paid. Our family was safe. But what mattered most to me was the man standing beside me. Helena, Jacob said softly, taking my hands in his, are you all right? I am now. Pastor Williams cleared his throat. Well, this has certainly been the most eventful wedding ceremony I've ever attempted to perform. A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the congregation. Speaking of which, Jacob said, his eyes never leaving mine, I have a question to ask. He dropped to one knee right there in front of the altar, in front of the entire town. My heart started racing again, but this time with joy instead of fear. Helena Morrison, he said, his voice clear and strong, I've loved you from the first day I saw you reading to Mrs. Patterson's children in the town square. I've watched you grow into the most beautiful, brave, and kind woman I've ever known. Tears started rolling down my cheeks. I don't have much to offer, he continued. Just a blacksmith's forge, honest work, and a heart that belongs completely to you. Will you marry me? Not because of debts or family pressure or social expectations, but because we choose each other. The answer came from the deepest part of my soul. Yes, yes, Jacob Hayes, I'll marry you. He slipped a simple silver ring onto my finger. It wasn't fancy or expensive, but it was made by his own hands with love and hope and promises for our future. The church erupted in cheers and applause. Mrs. Hartwell was crying happy tears. Even Papa was smiling through his relief and exhaustion. But what I didn't expect was Pastor Williams' next words. Well, he said with a grin, we're already here, the bride is already in white, and we have plenty of witnesses. Would you like to get married right now? Jacob looked at me with questioning eyes. Helena, we don't have to rush if you want a proper wedding. This is proper, I interrupted. This is perfect. This is exactly how it should be, my choice made freely, with love instead of obligation. And so, 20 minutes after I thought my life was over, I found myself speaking marriage vows to the man I had secretly loved for years. Do you, Jacob Hayes, take Helena Morrison to be your wife, to love and cherish in joy and sorrow, in plenty and want, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Jacob said, his voice strong and sure. Do you, Helena Morrison, take Jacob Hayes to be your husband, to love and honor, in joy and sorrow, in plenty and want, for as long as you both shall live? I do, I whispered, meaning it with every fiber of my being. Then by the power vested in me by the territorial government, I pronounce you husband and wife. Jacob, you may kiss your bride. And he did. Right there in front of God and everyone, Jacob Hayes kissed me like I was the most precious thing in the world, like I was worth everything he had to give. When we finally broke apart, the church was full of cheering and applause. Papa was crying, tears of relief and gratitude. Mama was dabbing at her eyes with her handkerchief. Mrs. Hayes, Jacob whispered against my ear. Mrs. Hayes, I repeated, loving the sound of it. Later, as the sun set over Millbrook, Jacob and I sat on the porch of what was now our home. His forge was quiet for the evening, the tools neatly arranged for tomorrow's work. Do you ever regret it? I asked. Marrying a woman whose father almost got us all killed? Jacob pulled me closer, his arm warm and strong around my shoulders. Helena, you saved me long before I saved you. How's that? I was just existing before you. Working, eating, sleeping, but not really living. You taught me what it means to have something worth fighting for. The stars were coming out one by one, painting silver patterns across the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called to its mate. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we build a life together, a real life based on love and trust and choice. And Papa's mine money will help your family start over." But that's their story to write. This is ours. I leaned against his shoulder, feeling more at peace than I had in months. The future stretched out before us like an unwritten book full of possibilities and promise. "Jacob." "Yes?" "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for being worth saving." As the last light faded from the western sky, Jacob Hayes and I sat together in comfortable silence, knowing our love had survived every storm and would carry us into a future filled with hope and peace.